So Shia LaBeouf recently disclosed in some interviews that he's been doing to promote his new film. The film is about a famous Catholic priest in Italy. So Shia LaBeouf's doing this movie, finished this movie, and he has revealed in a series of interviews that he has converted to Catholicism. And I think that it's really, so I watched these interviews, not in full, I need to, but I just didn't have time. But I wanted to watch enough to be able to comment on this because I think it's an interesting development. I've been loosely following the Shia LaBeouf case. He's admitted, there's not a mystery here. He's admitted that he abused the women who were suing him. He is the subject of a civil lawsuit by two former girlfriends. One of them is a famous singer, and I'm going to mispronounce her name. I'm sorry, I should have looked it up, but it's FKA Twigs, or is it pronounced FKA Twigs? Sorry, I don't know. But anyway, it's spelled FKA Twigs. Famous singer, apparently really talented. She also starred in the autobiographical movie Honey Boy that Shia LaBeouf wrote and starred in. And so anyway, they met through this movie and they started dating. She was his girlfriend for a while, and she and another ex-girlfriend of his, Carolyn Foe, allege in a lawsuit, a civil suit, that he abused them in various ways. And when this lawsuit was filed, when it came out, Shia LaBeouf went on record saying that, yeah, I've abused people, including myself, but yeah, I've abused people and I'm in no position to tell them how to feel about it. And then recently in these interviews that he's done, he said, I abused that woman. He called her a saint and whatever. Now, it seems to me that he is showing contrition. I know that there's valid skepticism whenever a celebrity does anything, how much of it is calculated or whatever. But it really does seem like Shia is not using any kind of playbook per se. It seems like he went through a genuine conversion experience, and it also seems like, as he said, he was humbled by this experience of being sued and having, as he terms it, an ego death, meaning that basically he was just his reputation, his ego, it was just completely, destroyed, because now people look at him and they think about the fact that he was a monster to these women and abused them, and he has admitted that. Now, he's not admitted to everything. He said in his letter to Olivia Wilde, in which he contested the idea that she has been promoting that she fired him, which apparently it's looking like she really didn't fire him. I think Olivia is quite the liar and has some issues. But anyway, but he said in this letter to Olivia, he said that. He said, my problems with my ex are fundamental and real, meaning that I did abuse her. And he said, but the narrative is not correct, or the narrative that's been put out there is not necessarily correct. I think probably what's going to happen in this civil trial is that there are going to be parts of the lawsuit that Shia will contest. I think that I've read the lawsuit. I think it looks to me like there were certain accusations that were presented in such a way as to be as sensational or as disturbing as possible. And look, I'm not denying that what's in there is that Shia did not abuse these women. He said he did, and that what's described in there is not disturbing. I'm just saying that based on what I saw and the way certain things were presented, I'm sure that there's things in court, that specific things, some things that he'll take issue with. But it looks like he's taking responsibility in a way that is very, very rare. And if you don't agree with me, or you take a look at these interviews and watch them and see what you think. But here's what I wanted to address. I actually want to talk today. I am going to talk more about the Shia LaBeouf case and about this situation and the lawsuit and everything, especially as the trial approaches. I think it's going to be an interesting one to follow. Again, believing that he's guilty of some abusive behavior and some terrible things, right? So, but just an interesting trial to observe, right? But anyway, what I want to focus on today is the religious conversion that he's been talking about. It does seem to be very genuine, and I have been working on a series, a video series about Christianity for the past several weeks. Some of you know that I was born into Christianity and then later born again and became a Christian. So, like, I was my family, they were Southern Baptist, East Texas Southern Baptist, which is very, very fundamentalist. If you don't know, fundamentalist Christian. And it was a very devout family in that sense, in that I went to church, we went to church a lot. And there were times when, growing up, I was going to church 3 times a week for various reasons. But from an infant, raised in the church and everything. And then later had a kind of a cliched experience of going to college and learning about stuff that made me reevaluate the situation. And I was like sort of agnostic for a while. And then now I've become basically what I refer to as a theist, which means that personally speaking, I do believe in a God and I do believe in some kind of divine plan for our lives and for this world. But I don't subscribe to any particular religion or anything. And I think a lot of people are like that. But anyways. But I was raised, very much raised in the church and not Roman Catholicism or anything. But I recognize, my point is that I recognize in these interviews that Shia LaBeouf has done and in the statements that he's making, I recognize what he's expressing. I recognize what he's feeling. And even though Catholics don't use the term born again or don't have the concept of being psychologically born again like the Baptists and other fundamentalists do, what Shia LaBeouf describes is a kind of religious awakening, a kind of being born again, whether you use the term or not, right? And so I've been working for the past couple of weeks or so on a series because of my background in Christianity and my interest in it, and I've studied a lot of stuff related to it, read a lot of books and everything, right? I'm not like some super expert, but I know enough to be able to talk about it in some classes that I've taught and where we've looked at the connections between literature and the Bible and film and the Bible. And Christian themes in film and stuff. And so anyway, things I've read, things I've taught, whatever, I feel competent to be able to talk about certain ideas in Christianity that I find interesting. So that's my series, basically. It's a kind of an appreciation series on Christianity, and it'll be coming out soon. I'm finishing it up. But a kind of appreciation series on Christianity for that Christians, I think, will get something out of, and I think that non-Christians and atheists and whoever, right, will enjoy. But anyway, here's the point. I am very interested in this topic, and I do believe that Shia LaBeouf had a genuine conversion experience. And again, look at the interviews yourself and see what you think. But I do think it was genuine. I see profound positives to this, and I also see things for him to be wary of, and I'll explain that in a moment. But obviously, look, here's the thing. I know that there are a lot of people who, especially in my audience, because I have a number of Marilyn Manson fans in my audience, and I know that Marilyn Manson fans are not typically great lovers of the Christian institution of the church, right? And not necessarily real Christianity, right? But what I've found among a lot of my fans is actually a very real deep intellectual appreciation and psychological appreciation for real spiritual belief, or real belief in God, however you define that, right? And something that's meaningful, personally meaningful to people. So I don't think that, I guess the point that I'm making is that I think that a lot of you understand, what I'm about to say when I say that for a lot of people, genuine religious or spiritual feeling or conversion experiences or just spiritual experiences, awakenings, whatever you want to call it, for a lot of people, a number of people, let's say, this is really the only thing that will work for them. And what I mean by that is that the higher power. Look, why do you think in AA? And I don't want to get into the whole controversy of whether AA is good or bad or whatever, right? Like I've seen it work for a lot of people, and I think that's great. And so I don't want to get into that whole debate. But I just want to say, though, I understand. It makes perfect sense to me why the higher power is such a focus in AA, because it seems very true to me in the life that I've lived so far. It seems very true to me from what I've observed that there are a number of people who have habits or addictions or behavior patterns or relational patterns. I hate this one, straight hair. I'm sorry, it's driving me nuts. Here, let's make this go away. complete distraction there. But anyway, there are people, we all have all these different problems, but there are a number of people, and a not insignificant number, who they might try everything, and nothing really seems to get them to make real progress until they have a kind of religious or spiritual connection or experience. And I have known, I'm not saying it happens a lot or all the time, but it happens enough to where I've known a number of people for whom the only thing that would end up turning them around and getting them out of an addiction that was destroying them, or getting out of some kind of behavior that was destroying them, or getting out of a toxic relationship that they couldn't leave, was leaning on a higher power, or a sense of the spiritual, or a sense of the divine, in the sense that there is a God who has an interest in and a will for our lives. And that we have a spiritual side and a spiritual nature that we can tap into should we choose. I've seen this work for too many people. Not that it makes their lives perfect, or it cleans everything up, or that they don't still have their hypocrisies or their challenges or their issues, but I've seen it make a fundamental difference in a lot of lives. And I've seen it at times make a fundamental difference in mine. Sure, religious belief, especially religious institutions, and fighting between religions, it's caused so much pain and deaths and all kinds of problems. And I don't like the repressive aspects of some religions. And there was a lot of stuff, believe me, that I was raised with that I don't like. But there was a lot, but one of the great gifts that being raised in a truly believing environment, like I was, one of the great gifts that it gave me was a feeling that the spiritual is real, and that the world that we are living in is a kind of matrix of unreality in a way. And so, and we can, and maybe in a video I'll get into the idea of, Platonism and Plato, and the idea that that this world is a kind of a simulation, which even Elon Musk agrees. Well, that is what a lot of religions teach as well, that we are here in a kind of a material simulation. But that there are other dimensions, there are other realities, and there is a lot more meaning to our lives than what we are able to perceive. Now, again, you might say it's BS or whatever, but I'm saying it's a very powerful idea, and it's a very powerful motivator for a lot of people. Even though I concede that religion also motivates a lot of people to do a lot of bad stuff, so I don't know, you're gonna, how do we weigh it? But I'm just telling you that what I've seen personally is that it's a net gain for the people I've seen it work for, the people in my life. Now, so he's had this conversion experience, and you can just see by the way he's talking that he's fully into it, and you can see that it has had, I'm talking about Shia LaBeouf, you can see that it has had so far a profound experience on his life. He seems relieved and released of something, and he also seems able to take responsibility for his sins, or whatever word you want to use, but for this abuse. He even owns up to misrepresenting his own father in Honey Boy, because he makes his own father out to be abusive, and he says that his father was not abusive. Yeah, his father had issues, but his father wasn't abusive. Shia apologizes for that. Shia says, I will owe for the rest of my life. I will owe people. I will be making amends. That's powerful. If it's real, right? And again, maybe some of you are saying, oh, it's just an act, but I just don't think so from what I've observed and everything read. Okay, now, I said that religion, let me tell you a story, okay? I think this story is really powerful. We can debate AA, but it has worked for a hell of a lot of people when nothing else has worked. And I've been to AA meetings before. I've never had a problem with alcohol. I don't like alcohol, but had other issues, and which I'm very open about, right? And so I've been to AA meetings, and I thought that on the whole they were very, very positive. And I don't see where the critiques come in. Yes, I understand that it doesn't have a high initial success rate. Guess what? Nothing does. Most people, the vast majority of people who go to rehab are gonna fail when they get out of rehab. The vast majority of people who go to AA are gonna fail. It is very rare to find someone who can just do the Elton John thing. And just, if you've seen Rocketman's such a great show. If you haven't seen it, watch it. Movie, I mean. Elton John finally, after many, many years, got to the end of his rope with drugs and alcohol and just stopped. Some people can, I mean, he started going to AA, but I'm just saying, like, he stopped, he never looked back, right? Some people can do that, but it's very, very rare. So, of course, yeah, AA often fails. But it seems to be, and I've said so many people who've had success with it and tell me that there was just nothing else that would work. So, but anyway, here's my point. Do you know how AA started? You know how AA started? This is an interesting story. And if you're interested in Carl Jung, I've talked about the philosopher and psychoanalyst Carl Jung before a bit on my channel. He can be credited with helping to start AA in a manner of speaking. So let me tell you this story. It's an interesting story. And I don't remember people's names or whatever. I don't remember exact dates. I'm not even going to try. Okay, but we're talking, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, we're talking at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, okay? Somewhere around there. And there was a guy who was a horrible alcoholic, and he's just totally, he had a pretty high position in society, as I remember reading, or he was considered to be a good socioeconomic class, some swanky friends or whatever. But he had a terrible drinking problem, and it was just awful. And he had tried everything that he could, and nothing would work. And so, back then there weren't a lot of resources for people with addictions. But anyway, Betty Ford is really the one who opened the door on that. It's a whole other story, but it's an interesting, inspiring story. Good for her. Anyways, so this guy that I'm talking about, he ended up going to a sanatorium. And it was a mental hospital or a sanatorium. I can't remember. But anyway, it was one of the few places that would treat or would try to treat alcoholism and addictions and stuff. And so there was a doctor working there named Carl Jung. And this is the Carl Jung, the successor to Sigmund Freud, genius of psychoanalysis and philosophy and whatever. And Carl Jung had an appreciation for the spiritual. He himself was not a Christian, was not a believer per se, but he had strong interest in religion, mysticism, even the paranormal at times, but he wasn't like some parapsychologist or anything, okay? Very, very esteemed, very, very brilliant, right? Anyway, so this guy goes, spends some time there, sobers up, again, they didn't have like conventional therapy or support groups, per se, but there would be sessions with the doctor, sessions with Jung. Anyway, and apparently, it didn't work for the guy. I don't know, I can't remember if he finished his time there with Jung at this hospital and then he fell off the wagon when he got back, or if he just fell off the wagon when he was there, or whatever, but he was not successful. And he was so desperate, as if any of you have ever suffered from addiction, and known people who have, he was so desperate, and it's so tragic to see that internal split, that fight being waged between these two sides. It's so tragic because there is this side, the better part of the person that really, really wants out, but there's also the side that is of them that's just fighting them tooth and nail, and is also a legitimate side, a wounded side, or a traumatized side, or a side that maybe is defective in terms of, chemistry or what have you, right? So it's tragic. I read an article by the wife of Philip Seymour Hoffman. Don't worry, I'm coming back to the topic of Jung and AA, but I like to meander, okay? You learn things. And you learn things actually better sometimes through the meandering because it's more organic. But anyway, Philip Seymour Hoffman, famous actor, brilliant actor, called the greatest actor of his generation. And of course, he died of a heroin and cocaine overdose. He had been sober for many years. He fell off the wagon. It was very tragic. Well, anyway, his wife at the time when he died, his long-term wife, mother of his children, she wrote an article a couple of years after that in Vogue about what that whole process was like. And she talked about of their lives together, and then him getting off the wagon and addiction and everything. And she said that it was so hard to see that the old Phil was still there, and the guy who had all these great qualities and desperately wanted to get out of this trap, but then seeing him waging this constant battle with this other Phil, with this other person who was deeply suffering and who had gotten hooked into what seemed like the solution, right? Anyway. Well, so this guy and Jung, now we're back in the, I think early 20th century or whatever, or late 19th, early 20th century. I'm bad with dates. But this guy and Jung, right? Here they are. and he's fallen off the wagon, or treatment is not working, and he says to Jung, he says, well, so what do I do now? And Jung says to him, you got to love this, right? Would any doctors today say this? Maybe they would. So ballsy. Jung says to him, there's nothing you can do. You're fucked, basically. Now, he didn't use the word fuck, right? But the guy says to him, basically, the guy says, I have fallen off the wagon. Oh my God, what do I do? What do I do? And Jung says, there's no hope. He says, you will be, basically saying you'll be an alcoholic the rest of your life until it kills you. And Jung wasn't trying to use tough love or anything. He wasn't trying to shock the guy. That wasn't Jung's style anyway. No, he was just, he was honestly answering the guy's question, and that was his belief. And the guy was in so much despair. He was in such despair because he didn't want to be an alcoholic for the rest of his life. He hated this, Everybody who's been through addiction knows what I'm talking about. He says no. No, nothing. He wasn't expecting that answer, right? From the doctor. He thought at least the doctor would lie to him and say, well, you'll try again or whatever, right? Jung says that. It's hopeless. The guy was so despairing. He says, really? Really? There's nothing else I can try? And Jung says no. And then, according to the story, Jung stops, pauses for a moment, contemplative. And he says to the guy, well, there's one thing, the last resort you can try. The guy's like, what? Anything, tell me. And Jung says, occasionally, he says, I have observed occasionally situations in which people who were in the grip of some just insurmountable addiction and who had tried everything, nothing had worked, that they were able to finally overcome it by achieving a kind of religious awakening or religious conversion experience. And Jung says, so what I would suggest, if you want to try, if you're willing to try anything, find some kind of a religious community that you can get involved in and try to have a conversion experience. Try to become spiritual, try to become religious or whatever, right? And so the guy did that, and he found that it was actually helpful. And I can't remember if he stopped drinking immediately or if there were kind of some more things that happened. But very, very quickly after he began to get involved in the church, he stopped and was able to stop for good. Now, there was a friend of his, and here's where I start to get hazy on the story, but apparently there was a friend of his that he also then, once he got sober, was able to encourage in his sobriety, and so the two of them basically formed this kind of like supper club of two or whatever. They would get together and they would have, coffee, or I don't know if people did that back then, or they would eat in a restaurant, or I don't know, they get together at one of their homes, but they would hang out. And they would also, the idea was they supported each other in their sobriety. Now, around this time, here's the end of the story. I'm getting there, okay? Get to the end. There was this other guy that they were friends with, and this guy had an alcohol problem to make theirs look pale in comparison. This guy was just the most notorious drunk in their socioeconomic circle, in their friendship circle that they knew. And this guy, they felt like they could intercede with him, basically do a kind of an intervention, I guess I should say. And so that's what they did. And they said to him, and he basically said, when they approached him, he basically said, yeah, nothing's going to get me to stop drinking. And they said, start coming to our meetings. Start coming to our house. We're having these meetings. And I think they even allowed him to drink beer there. Traditionally, old school AA, they would at times have beer on hand so that people, if they were going through the withdrawals or whatever, and like new people who weren't ready to totally quit, they would even do that, which I think is cool. But anyway, they said, let us, let's talk, let's pray, let's do these things. And long story short, okay, basically, this is the guy, this new convert that they had to their method. He was the guy who started AA as we know it today. And sometime after the fact, these men wrote a letter to Carl Jung. And I don't know that he ever got it. He died not too long after. But they wrote a letter to Carl Jung, the great philosopher and psychoanalyst Carl Jung, saying, "Thank you so much. It is because of you, because of your advice, that we started Alcoholics Anonymous." And I don't know if they called it that back then. I don't know if it had a different name. But thanks to you, we started this thanks to your inspiration, and now it's this big thing, and it's growing, and it's helped many, many people. So what is all up with all that? My point is that Jung understood what a number of us have seen, which is that for people, there are some people for whom nothing else works except religious conversion experiences of some kind. You know, I've talked about this, I think, before, but there's a famous idea known as Pascal's wager. Some of you know what this is, but it's interesting to talk about it. Pascal's wager. So Pascal was this famous mathematician, came up with some concepts that you might have studied in high school. Oh, yay. I was terrible at math. Terrible. But anyway, I'm as gifted as I may be when it comes to words and to speaking and writing and English and all that. Like, I'm so terrible at math. I'm such a dummy. But anyway, where was I going with all that? Pascal. So he's a mathematician, but also a philosopher and a Christian. And he came up with this thing called Pascal's wager, all right? And he came up with it for him, it was a kind of a formula geared toward Christianity, but I'm just going to expand it a bit, and instead of referring to it in terms of Christianity, we're just going to talk about belief in God, okay? Theism, whatever you want to say, or polytheism, right? Polytheism, here's another little aside, okay? Polytheism is something that we Westerners often, whether we do it obviously or just internally, kind of turn our nose up at the notion as being very strange because it is so alien, most of us, to our way of thinking in our culture, right? Polytheism, the belief in more than one God. And I think that what's interesting, though, is that when you actually think about the way that our world is and the fact that our world is so contradictory and has so many contradictory elements, it actually, to me, makes a kind of a real sense, the idea that this universe or this existence is governed by multiple gods of varying persuasions and personalities and priorities and personal failings and weaknesses and strengths, who are at war with each other using human beings and nature and everything as puppets. I think that's actually a great metaphor for the seeming chaos and contradictions of life in this world. So anyway, it's funny because I was telling a friend of mine this when I was in graduate school, and I was going through a particularly difficult time of just really agonizing over my religious beliefs or lack thereof or whatever. And anyway, I made this comment to him about how sometimes polytheism, Greek mythology sometimes makes more sense to me than Christianity. No offense to anybody. And so he bought me this statue of Athena, about this tall, and it was like a stone statue. I don't know if it was expensive, probably not, but it looked classy, and it looks like an idol. Like, it looks like something that you would maybe set up as a part of a shrine, right? I still have it to this day, and so I always thought that was funny. He sent that to me he said for religious awakening. Anyways. Where was I going with all of that? Yeah, so polytheism, that was my little detour. Anyway, back to Pascal. That's where we were. So here's Pascal's wager, all right? Here it is. And tell me if there's a flaw in this logic, because I don't see it, all right? I'm interested in the comments. You tell me if you see a flaw in this logic. Pascal says that neither the believer, I'm just going to say theist, okay? Someone who believes in God. Could be polytheist or what, I don't care. But neither the believer, the theist, nor the atheist, neither one can convincingly prove their position by evidence. There is no way that someone who believes in God can prove to the rest of us that God exists. I'm talking about in terms of like using objective theorems and evidence. Nobody has a video of heaven or the next life or another dimension or, their near-death experiences or whatever's out there, whatever happens after. Nobody has video of it yet, right? We don't. And while a number of people have had near-death experiences that I think are very interesting and indicative, I believe, of these spiritual higher realities, we don't have documentation quite yet of any of that either. So Pascal says, you believe in God? Great, but you can't prove it. And you don't believe in God? Great, but you can't prove it. People can say, well, how could there be so many horrible things in this world if there were God? How could there be such evil if there were God? Well, that's certainly a compelling question. It might be the most compelling question of all. But it is, alas, or yay, or whatever, it is not proof of any kind that God doesn't exist. It's simply your argument. Simply someone's argument. So anyway, neither can prove their position, right? So Pascal says that belief and disbelief or non-belief, they are wagers, they are bets. And so Pascal says this: we should consider the ramifications of the bet, the possible ramifications of the bet that we are making as we live our lives according to the idea that there either is a God or there is not a God, right? And he is correct in this, that everyone is placing a kind of a bet. What do I mean by that? I'm not talking about it in terms of like the fundamentalist perspective, fundamentalist Christianity I was raised with, where, when you die, you're going to heaven or hell. Some of you believe that. That's part of your faith, and I don't want to at all get into whether that's legitimate or not. It is a question that I'm going to look at in my series on Christianity that's going to be coming out soon. But I don't want to get into that right now. But I'm just going to say, though, most people, I don't think, see it as this heaven or hell binary. I think that most people who believe that there is something, but much more sort of mysterious, or something that we would have no concept of, that might come after. Or if you believe in reincarnation, the next life. But anyway, here's my point. Pascal says that because neither position can be proved, because then, therefore, it is a wager, he says, consider the ramifications of your wager. So we all place wagers in the sense not of choosing a belief that will take us to heaven or hell. I mean, some of you believe that, and that's fine, or not, or whatever, I don't know. But wagers in the sense that whether or not you believe in God, or whether or not you believe in a higher kind of meaning or plan, either for existence in the universe or for your own life, and whether or not you believe that God takes an interest in your life, like all of these questions, all of these issues, they profoundly affect how you live your life. And I'm not talking about just simple things of like, if I believe in God, then I won't cheat on my wife. If I don't believe in God, then I will. I think that you don't have to believe in God to be a deeply moral person. So I'm not talking about that per se, but I am saying that people that believing in God, believing in some of the things I talked about, being a theist or being a Christian or something more specific, it does affect the way that you live your life and your outlook in a lot of ways, right? And true for the other as well. So Pascal says that if we're wanting to be practical, then we should consider which philosophy about life, belief or non-belief, is the most beneficial in terms of, not just in terms of when you die, if you find out that you were wrong, right? Like if someone who doesn't believe in God, they die and then it turns out that there was a God and they're like, oh, well, maybe I could have plugged into, spiritual stuff more. It would have benefited me or whatever, right? But I'm just talking about, even on this earth, right? Thinking about, does belief would that provide for me, like with Shia LaBeouf, would that provide extra motivation? Would that provide some kind of clarity? Would that provide some kind of impetus to live, as Shia says now, a more purposeful life, or a life where he feels like he is plugged into a higher divine power, and that helps him to get out of bed every day, or that helps him to be a nicer person, or to try to admit and atone for what he's done? Those are questions that only individuals can answer, right? Like I can't answer those questions for you, and you can't for me. But I do think that it is an interesting idea that Pascal presents to us there. Pascal says that because it is a bet, then look at it rationally, and which is the more rational bet. And ultimately what Pascal concludes, and the point of this exercise is to say that unlike the cliche that a lot of people have about religious belief, that it is irrational, and in fact, Pascal and others, and I would say this too, that in fact it can be a deeply rational thing, spiritual belief. And I also happen to believe that it is logical, right? And I'll get into that later. And I'm not here to proselytize or anything. I'm just here to explore. And I think it's interesting. And I definitely, in future videos and in my series on Christianity, I'm going to also give the atheist perspective its due as well. Why Christianity? Why not other religions? Just because Christianity is where I want to start. But I want to move on to Buddhism. That's the next one that I want to do. Okay, but here's the thing. I did say regarding Shia LaBeouf, okay? I did say that he should be wary of something, and that is this. Religion or spirituality or whatever term you want to use, it is its own high. It is its own high. And if you have never experienced the high of a religious experience, if you've never experienced the high of a religious awakening or of a born-again experience, or as Shia LaBeouf says, what really did it for him, what really converted him, it sounds like, was experiencing the Latin Mass, which I've never experienced before. I'm not Catholic. I have been to a couple of Catholic services, but it wasn't the traditional Latin Mass. But Shia LaBeouf, as he describes it, it sounds like a very mystical experience that gives one this sense of being connected to the divine. And for him, he seems to indicate that that was kind of the crack that opened up, right? That through that opened up a kind of an awareness or an appreciation or a kind of a crack in his heart through which he had this experience, this transformative, it sounds like profoundly sort of mystical or born-again experience, even though, of course, he doesn't say born again. Now, it is its own high, those types of things. And I've experienced chemical highs from substances, and I've experienced the high that you get in a musical concert when everything is just gelling. And I'm sure some of you have experienced this if you've ever been to a concert before, not any old concert, but a concert where something just really kicks in, and everybody's sort of swept away in this feeling that the music provides. That is what we're talking about is transcendence, okay? That's what we're talking about. I'm going to talk about this more later in another video, but human beings have a profound desire, and you can just read your Joseph Campbell. Human beings have a profound desire for transcendence. Transcendence meaning to go beyond boundaries. Why do you think in sexuality it's called trans, right? It's because, the idea of going beyond boundaries. So transcendental is the idea of going beyond the material world into transcending it into a higher spiritual realm in some way. This kind of experience, or transcending the boundaries between people, which also is tremendously important, and we feel the burden of the walls between us every single day. The walls between us, a tremendous burden, creates a tremendous amount of anxiety, distance, loneliness, frustration, all of these things. And so one of the primary reasons why people engage in substance use or abuse or whatever is to deal with those things, to deal with the anxiety and to make real connection. Why do people like to, I'm not a drinker, but why do people like to drink, go to bars and drink? Because they want to have something that lowers their inhibitions enough that they can get outside of the self versus other binary, and they can actually transcend the self and have a moment of communion with the other, even in a bar. Now, what I'm trying to say is that this kind of experience, yes, it's available through substance use, and I'm not endorsing that, okay? And obviously, it's a big problem, right? Substance abuse. But also through these kinds of shared mystical experiences or shared musical experiences, even in a concert, or like with Shia LaBeouf, in a religious experience. And so what I'm trying to say about Shia LaBeouf is that we have someone here who is an admitted addict, and has an admittedly, it sounds like a very compulsive personality, has suffered with that, very compulsive, addictive personality. Someone who, from what I've observed, is really intense. It doesn't take a brain surgeon to see, or Freud to see that, right? But intense, but yes, very intense, and with a high need for, a high degree of need for these transcendental experiences. And so, even if it's just, through alcohol, this idea to escape the self or become something else or whatever. And he seems profoundly, Shia LaBeouf has seemed profoundly troubled. He seemed to me and to many over the years, like he's really wrestling, as they say, demons. So here's not real demons, right? But like his own personal psychological problems. And so for people in that situation, religion can be the thing that saves them. And I hope that it is that for Shia. But where I am, just as I said, a little bit wary, is that he is so, the way he describes it, he is so obviously just totally on board with this newfound thing that he said he never knew he needed, he had never experienced before. And I get the feeling that Shia has never had a profound religious or spiritual, transcendental experience before. And I guess this is the point I'm trying to make, is that like any high, the high of religion, it does wear off. And the high of that transcendental religious experience, or that mode of being, even for those who stay committed to it, and many, many do, and it's a beautiful thing. But there is a kind of for lack of a better word, there's a kind of withdrawal that occurs with that once the newness and the freshness of all of that, wears off, and once one sort of becomes accustomed to the idea of having this sort of deeper personal relationship with what one perceives as a higher power, and also, whatever other benefits, that Shia psychologically is feeling from this. And he just seems so enthusiastic, and I think that's great. But also, it's a kind of enthusiasm that is also a kind of a high in and of itself. And I'm not suggesting that I'm just saying that religion, Karl Marx, when he said that it was the opiate of the masses, I'm not a big lover of Karl Marx, as a lot of you know, and everything. But he was keen to one thing, that religion has the kind of opiate-like properties, or drug-like properties in what it does to the brain, and the effects that it has, and the sort of transcendence that people experience through it. And again, I think that is a beautiful thing, and I think it is the gateway to a spiritually evolved way of living, much like the tremendous sexual urge that people experience early in their relationship when you're first falling in love. Not just sexual, but that early passion, they call it the honeymoon period or whatever. That does not last either, but it is a gateway, if it's successful then, into a stable and fulfilling companionate relationship, companionate romantic love. And so I see it as similar things. And so what I would say to Shia is just understand that at a certain point that high is you're gonna come down from that high, the newness of it and all of that's gonna wear off. But try to remember these powerful benefits that you've gotten from this. Try to remember this feeling, this connection that you feel, and then through your future spiritual practices, whatever they may be, you will be continually, rekindling that and going back to it, but then also a deepening process too, like the deepening process that people experience in a marriage or what have you. Anyway, I hope some of that makes some kind of sense. I don't know. And again, what the fuck do I know? But I'm just putting out my opinions, my ideas. Let me know what you think. And like I said, I'm going to be talking more about this stuff later soon. Okay. As always, if you got anything out of this, like, subscribe. I appreciate your donations on PayPal and Patreon. The links are below. I just want to say that after I did that video a week or two ago, where I complained about some people who have been complaining to me about how I advertise my payments, my tip methods at the end. They said, you shouldn't be hawking, your Patreon and your PayPal links. It's tacky. I know I complained about that a couple of weeks ago on one of my shows, and I just want to say that I got a really nice response after that. There was more than a few people who donated, which was really nice, but also like some notes and stuff from people. And again, it's just a tiny, most people are wonderful, like 99% of people are wonderful. It's just that tiny, annoying few that brings me down sometimes, but I'm working on it. Anyway, okay, that's all. More for you later. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.